I'm Peter Mansbridge, and this is The National. Another day searching for the Franklin ships. The ultimate prize is finding at least one of those famous wrecks. Parks Canada is searching. What if they find Erebus and Terror? What happens then?
The government has I think, expanded upon that commitment.
And that wraps up our special first night coverage of the Franklin Expedition Search for the Ships. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Okay, so that news story was paid for. Parks Canada paid the CBC $65,000 to cover that thing. Here's what happened. That story aired over a couple of nights on The National in September 2012. About a year later, there was an anonymous access to information request. It wasn't filed to the CBC because they could claim journalistic privilege. It was filed to Parks Canada, and the documents that came out was a contract between Parks Canada and the CBC. Parks Canada agreed to give the CBC $65,000. The CBC wrote that they intended to produce a documentary segment for The National, an online component on cbc.ca, and nightly news segments on CBC. I don't know, maybe it's no big deal. I mean, this is not like a major political story, it's just this Parks Canada adventure expedition. And the CBC is strapped for cash, I mean, because of the Harper government. It's not the same thing as the public broadcaster being paid by Harper to shill for his policies, right?
I told the crew of the boat yesterday, I'm sure someday they're going to come around the bend and there's going to be the ship and there's going to be the body of Franklin.
Actually, it's exactly that. Recovering these shipwrecks from the Franklin expedition, it's a pet project of Stephen Harper's. He mentioned it in the last throne speech. But even so, I mean, maybe this is Harper's version of sending a man to the moon. It's a nice thing. So what if CBC took a few bucks to cover it? It's expensive to cover stories in the Arctic. It's not the same thing as paying the public broadcaster to run government propaganda supporting, I don't know, land claims against Russia, right? Except that's exactly what it is. The Franklin expedition, according to the Harper government itself, is a way of establishing Canada's long-standing presence in the Arctic. That's what John Baird said when he was Environment Minister. By trying to get these shipwrecks out of the ocean, the hope was to enhance issues of sovereignty. Why does Harper want to assert Canada's sovereignty in the Arctic? Because there's oil there. It's supposed to be the next oil sands. It's predicted to be over 9 billion tons of oil and gas under the ocean. Now, Russia has made a claim on it as well. And in order to swing his dick around and mark his territory in the Arctic, Putin sent a submarine under the ocean to plant a Russian flag on the bottom of the sea underneath the North Pole. Harper's nerdy idea of reverse cogsmanship is to send Parks Canada to come and salvage these shipwrecks. But political theater like that doesn't work if nobody's there to notice it. And that explains the need to get Mansbridge on the boat. Now, the CBC denies taking money in exchange for TV news coverage. They say they took the money in exchange for web coverage. Their story is this wasn't news coverage. This was a website that was a joint project of Parks Canada and the CBC, and none of the money went for the National, even though it's explicitly stated in the contract. Now, maybe this website cost $65,000, or maybe saying so is a way to protect the CBC's chief correspondent from this whole mess. This story was largely ignored in the media. An indie news site broke it, some blogs picked it up, the anti-CBC crowd over at Sun News went to town on it. I'm not anti-CBC. I worked there. I watch CBC, I listen to it. I believe in public broadcasting. I give a shit about CBC's credibility. So this grosses me out. And it begs the question, who else is paying the CBC for news coverage?